Do I say the beep?
No. Nope, we have the beep.
Hi, I'm Dan Desko, and you can't make this up.
Welcome, everyone, to the very first edition of the You Can't Make This Shit Up podcast. As leaders, we often deal with challenges every single day in managing people, driving the results that we want, and often what we find is when we experience setbacks, when we experience challenges, we want to hide them. And this podcast is designed to flip that on its head and literally celebrate the most challenging times that we've had as leaders. To be able to celebrate our failures, our challenges, the things that helped us grow, overcome, and ultimately become better leaders. And so every single leader I've ever talked to has had a moment in their career where they start with, man, I just can't make this shit up. Mm-hmm. And so, therefore, the name of our podcast today, we're going to celebrate the successes and the failures. We're going to unpack lessons learned, and hopefully you as an audience can, one, laugh at our misery and our challenges, but two, be able to learn from the lessons that we learned through these experiences, apply them to your leadership journey, and ultimately become better leaders. So my name is Tim Tannert. I am the owner of a company called Culture Cures, where I help companies be able to build high-performing teams and cultures. With me is my co-host, Josh Roberts. Josh, you would want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Josh Roberts. I am the CEO of USA Talent Solutions. We're a talent management company based here in Pittsburgh. And we have three main divisions, really: professional, commercial, and field service division. I'm excited to get this podcast started. We've been talking about this for a long time now, and probably even more excited about having our first guest be my friend Dan Desko here with Echelon.
Let's go.
What's up, Dan? How we doing?
Hey guys, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
So
I'm honored to be your first guest.
Yep. 10 years from now, the trivia answer to who was the first guest on the You Can't Make This Shit Up podcast will be Dan Desko. So congratulations.
Nobody will know who that is.
Yeah. So Dan, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Dan Desko. I'm the CEO of a cybersecurity professional services firm, Echelon Risk Plus Cyber. We are a national firm. We have folks all across the United States and Mexico. Fully remote firm, which I'm very proud about, and I talk a lot about. But we're a mission and values-led organization, so we believe security and privacy are basic human rights, and that's kind of where the mission starts and ends for us, which we'll probably talk a little bit about that here today. But we do everything from hacking into companies legally on companies' behalfs to protecting those same companies and putting the right solutions and tools in place to help them get better and raise their awareness and defenses to cyber attacks. So it's a very rewarding and fulfilling career path. I believe that I've been led down, and I'm excited to talk about and share some of my experiences here today.
Absolutely. And so just briefly, as you think about cultivating talent and engaging your team, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to you to do that as the leader of the organization? Then what are some of the things that you do specifically to drive that?
It's so important. And I think as a remote firm, we have to work even twice as hard or 3 times as hard to do it. You have to be extremely intentional about that as a remote firm to drive engagement. And it's hard. There are a lot of mechanisms, and we'll call them tactics, but tactics sound contrived, right? I think it's looking for ways, natural ways, to be able to support your team in a remote way. But then I also look for opportunities to go out and see my team. And I encourage other leaders on our team to do that as well. So while we're remote 90% of the time, I will look for chances and opportunities to see people in person. So while I talk about remote work and I'm a big fan of remote work, I actually have an office that I go into on a regular basis just so that we can have a space to get together. And we have co-working space that we could leverage all over the country for that same thing. Case in point, we just hired a new marketing manager a couple weeks ago, and she's in Chicago. So after a few weeks, letting her get the ground underneath her feet solid, I went to Chicago for a few days to spend some time with her in person. And we joked about how a lot of the things that we talked about that week, probably would have never happened remotely. Mm. So I think it's important, especially when establishing a newer relationship, to, have some of that in-person interaction, which I think can be kept up remotely over time.
So when you think about these different tools or strategies, like what would be, because I think you're in a unique position, and I think you're kind of a thought leader in this space. So are there certain tools that you're using? Is there a certain cadence that you're using? You're meeting your marketing. Is that something you plan to do once a month, once every quarter? How do you think about the strategy around that?
Yeah, so there's a few things we do. We do an all hands every Monday afternoon. We call it our whole firm meeting pulse. And that meeting gets led by a different employee, whether you're an intern or you're a partner. Mm. That meeting gets led by a different person every week. So we give people the opportunity to sort of shine and also just show their personality. And we kick that meeting off every week with just, dealer's choice as far as ask a question, and then it's round robin. Everybody answers the question. That's been a lot harder now that we're over 50 people on these calls sometimes. So we have to keep the questions pretty light and short, but that's my favorite part of the week because I get to see people's personalities shine through. So that's one thing that we do that's every week. But other than that, I don't really have a set cadence, if you will. I do suggest to my leaders, I say, hey, keep a little kitty on the side, keep a little pot of travel money that you could employ every quarter or every 4 months, 5 months, whatever. And use that as a reward, to pull 4, 5, 6 teammates together locally somewhere. So we just look for those ways and judge it by feel. And I think when it's time, to get together. There's things like a new employee joins the team, right? And no one's met them yet, so it's time to get together. Or we know January is going to be a slow time, so let's plan maybe a little retreat in January to, get a few people together. So I think it's all about just being constantly intentional.
I love this topic because it's, especially after COVID, right? There's so many different views on this, and I think this is where it makes it fun, right? Because you can really stir the pot.
It's very polarizing.
Right? Yeah, it is. What do you think, and let's just think about this in terms of you can't make this shit up. What are some examples that you've seen on the other side, maybe, where people are either, we'll say old school, right? And just not willing to make a change, where you've seen this play out in real life?
Yeah, look, I've been there on the other side myself, right? There was a point in my career where when I was starting the cybersecurity practice at a previous firm, I went to hire my first, hacker, my first white hat hacker. And he lived in a rural town in Ohio, and there was just no office for him to go into. And it was very difficult to make the case to hire this person. And we were trying to come up with all these mechanisms to say, well, he's got to go into our Columbus office, 2 days a week, and we're going to have to like really supervise him and figure out what he's doing at home. Right. It's so mysterious. So I am proud to say we had the first ever sort of remote employee prior to COVID, at this firm that I worked at prior, but it worked, right? It worked out fine, and especially in what we do in consulting and cyber consulting, especially in that hacking world, like that's a position that could be remote and people can work remote. But it was just funny, right? Because I've been there. I've been there on the other side. I've had to make the case. I've had to go through the thinking of, well, how's this going to work? Thinking through all that. So, it's interesting.
So what would you say is one of the biggest challenges or the biggest, man, I can't believe this just happened, moments in your career as you think through the leadership journey that you've had throughout your career?
Yeah, that was a very thought-provoking question. First of all, Tim, I think I have a few of those moments in my life, right? One that's pretty serious that I'll kind of start with, and I don't mean to bring down the mood in any way, shape, or form, but there was a point in my career. I was a young consultant traveling on the road 80% of the time. I was in rural West Virginia at a client by myself all week, and it was Tuesday evening. I got a call from my best friend's girlfriend to let me know that he had passed. Mm. And it was a very difficult time. One of the worst days of my life. I remember calling my boss at the time and, relaying to him what happened. And, after 30 seconds or so, he said, I'm really sorry what happened, and I choked a few words out. The next words out of his mouth were, "Are you still okay to stay there through Friday?"
Wow.
And, I was mid-20s at the time. I didn't know how to react to that. Right. For me, I vividly remember that and I will never forget it. Mm. And I carry that with me today. And I think, that is definitely a can't make this shit up moment in my life that, I think has made me a better person and a better leader for having gone through that.
Absolutely. And so when you put yourself back in that moment, right, what happened to your engagement level as an employee post that event?
I was done.
Yeah.
I was done. I that Friday on my drive home, I remember like calling and talking to recruiters and calling the career services department at Pitt, where I just recently finished my MBA, and asking for some advice and some help. I mean, it was over for me that week, completely. So I think that's a great example, right, of like how a moment like that can be so mismanaged, and the effect it can have on someone with a total lack of empathy.
Yeah. I think just it's a little bit of the maybe the individual, but also sometimes can also be culture, right?
Absolutely.
We talk about culture cures, like that's an example of trying to figure out like where is this coming from, right? I know we've talked about this before, just empathetic leadership, and I feel like that's probably what has stuck with you and how you approach people now. Is that have you been in situations where you as a leader have been in a similar situation and you've been able to take those lessons learned and apply them?
Yeah, I try to, and I find myself I still have to work hard at it, right? Because I have to balance the empathy and care for our people with, I also worry about keeping the lights on and wanting to keep everybody employed in turbulent economic times. So it's like a regular struggle, right? Because I do want us to survive and employ people and be able to pay people and be able to give people raises and, but on the flip side, give people the flexibility and empathy that they deserve. And yeah, like over the last 3 years, I mean, come on, we've had so many situations, right? It's been a challenging past 3 years with the pandemic and everything going on in the economy and everything going on in the world, from a, just geopolitical standpoint, right? We've had employees on our team that have had, families affected by the things that are going on in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to see, especially when you're remote.
And as leaders, I often boil it down that the most important thing that we do as leaders is to get more out of the team than the sum of its part. Tom Izzo, great basketball coach, has this great quote that great players don't win championships, great teams do. And so part of getting the most out of our team and getting that engagement is expecting them to deliver more when they can. But the other side of that coin that I hear very few leaders talk about is the responsibility of the leader to give more to that team when they can, right? That tactical empathy, as you guys are discussing, or compassion, right? It's being able to really meet our team where they are when they're there and to give more of ourselves. And that's what I love about this story that you're sharing with us, Dan, right? Is one, how that made you feel as an employee and that failure of your leader at that time, but then being able to take that experience, grow from it, learn from it, add that to your leadership tool belt as you engage in your leadership journey to then be able to help others. And that's the whole point of this entire podcast. That's such a great story to kick us off, right? Because as leaders, we're not perfect. I joke around. My first week of leadership, I had the union called on me, right? You can't get to a worse leadership story. And now I'm a leadership coach, right? So leadership absolutely is something that is learned. It's not something inherently bestowed upon people, right? And so to then be able to take those experiences and to drive them forward is great. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I think that's a fantastic way to kick us off.
Yeah, and I think for our listeners out here, I mean, that's a perfect example. And I'm putting myself in the shoes. Like if I've been in a situation or a day where I haven't been the best leader, and could I have been in a situation where I did something similar? Like that's something to think about. And for people that are listening, like these are the type of things, there's probably people out there that are going through similar situations and trying to figure out how they're going to respond and react and be a leader in this situation. I think that's a great example of how the impact of how we lead can carry on with somebody forever. I talk about a lot of times in our purpose is a lasting impact that causes a ripple effect across the world, where we want to have a positive and meaningful impact, but sometimes that impact can be negative and cause a ripple effect. And so we just have to be really, really conscious of that. Also, in our values at USA, it's based on the acronym PRAISE, which is purpose-driven, raise the bar, accountability, impact, service, and empathy. Being the last one. And I say it's basically the golden rule, right?
Yeah.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think that's something to think about whenever you're leading teams, to make sure that you have that empathetic leadership.
The golden rule is great, but I think the platinum rule is maybe even better. And I don't know if you know the platinum rule, or if you can't recall it, but it's do unto others as they would want done unto them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Which
yeah, absolutely.
I think that is such a shift, and an important thing for leaders to think about. That the golden rule is good, right? But it orients what you're thinking about on you. The orientation is completely the wrong
versus
way.
emotional intelligence, where you're thinking about the other person.
Correct. Yeah, and orienting exactly on like how do they need to be treated in this situation, and how do they view that. And that's a monumental shift to try to think that way, right? Because I think in human nature is we think about ourselves a lot. And, I think what you said is exactly right, Tim. I think it's a constant thing that leaders need to work at.
Yes.
And be mindful of. And, it's not self-help nonsense. It's not mumbo jumbo, right? It is just a discipline, and it's a skill that you sharpen and hone. So yeah, I mean, kudos to you guys for being on the forefront and bringing these things up on a regular basis. And then you've turned this into a career for yourself in the next chapter that you're on, Tim. But that's why I love the idea of this podcast and agreed to this crazy idea, because I am very passionate about this topic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that story. And so let's unpack a little bit more then of your leadership journey. So that was early in your career, right, as you're getting through your MBA and starting your career. And so take us a little bit forward then. What's kind of the next you can't make this shit up story that you experienced through that journey?
Oh man, being on the road a lot, being in consulting, you see a lot of stuff. I was joking with Josh, everything from like, we've got maybe an employee at a Christmas party that's maybe had a little too much eggnog, right? And dressed up as Santa and starts telling all the females like, hey, come sit on my lap. And having to say like, oh boy, we should move some people upstairs. Mm-hmm. And like, why don't we go to the kitchen and maybe eat some food? To, being on the road, like with a team a couple days before the world shut down in New York City, mm-hmm. and just having an eerie vibe of what's going on. And, I ended up being on the leadership committee to help get us through the crisis of COVID and what that all meant. And believe me, the idea of empathy and protecting our people was definitely in the balance in those conversations a lot.
The whole COVID situation in general is like, you can't make this up, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Crazy.
So
it's still hard to believe that's our reality, right?
Exactly.
We went through that.
And we kind of shake our head, but let's unpack that a little bit.
Please.
As you went through COVID, right, there were challenges on a daily basis. So as a leader, how did you navigate your team through that? What were some of the steps that you consciously took to be there for them, right? The empathy that we just talked about, as well as leading the organization through an unprecedented disaster.
Yeah, it was fighting that balance of like, well, we have all these consultants that are scheduled to go on the field, and leave Sunday or Monday to either drive to clients, fly to clients, whatever. So it's like, do you just pull everybody back and then we have no billable hours and we don't know what's going on? We blow up the entire schedule. And that's where, I think we did a great job at that time as leaders and sat back and said, we have to think of the platinum rule in this case. We didn't exactly say that, right? But I think that's the conclusion we ultimately came to. There was some leaders in the organization that were like, well, this is crazy. We're sending people. If the client says they're going to be open, we're going to send the people to the client. I'm like, well, that's them. What about us, right? We get to decide if we want to put our people in harm's way or not. And they have a say, right? So I think ultimately COVID put everybody in these challenging situations that no one has dealt with a situation like that ever. Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm curious so we talked earlier about the remote environment. I'm just maybe circling back on like COVID. Where did you have prior to COVID, when you were in an office environment, did you ever have, or challenge the status quo in that environment? Were you ever thinking about that, or was it post-COVID where this kind of became a reality for you?
Yeah, there was the story I mentioned earlier of our first remote employee, right? And that was, I think a way that I sort of challenged that way of thinking, no way of knowing that this would become more of a full-time trend. But you look back on that situation that I described now and you laugh at it, because it's like, how can anyone say, that that'll never work? It clearly works.
Yeah.
It works for people all across the globe. But yeah, going into it, I think a lot of leaders were struggling with the idea of like, how are we going to maintain control?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Will it be chaos? And it maybe was a little bit of chaos for a little period of time, but I think everybody's settled into that new normal that we all called it, and was effective at it.
I think as entrepreneurs, I think some of the things that I cherish about being an entrepreneur is like the freedom and independence. And I think that with COVID, it allowed not just necessarily the entrepreneur or certain leaders to have that, but also to give that freedom and independence to everyone, and people started getting the taste of it, and what that was like. Yeah. And I think that was it's for me. I think it's an important part of our culture. I'm not saying that's necessarily perfect for everyone, but I think maybe talk about like the freedom and independence that comes with that environment, but also like the accountability piece. I always say freedom and independence with accountability, and maybe how your entrepreneurship journey, like how that started and how you ended up getting to where you are now.
Yeah, I think the remote environment definitely emphasized results over politics for me. I think in a fully remote environment, you could no longer hide behind politics. You can no longer, sit back and say, this person's in at 7 every day, they leave at 6, but what are the results that we're getting out of them, right? What are they actually doing that's creating value for the company? Or are they actually thriving here?
I love that.
And I think that was the big shift in my mind was, hey, it's like stripping back the veil here, and really at the end of the day, we're going to see results or we're not. And that's how people should be thinking when they think about success at an organization. It is about results, right? We do have to run a business. Politics can be, very corrosive. And I think for organizations that are maybe very politic heavy, this is a challenge for them.
Well, and I think part of the challenge is that most leaders and most organizations don't think about success at the individual employee level, right? So how do you measure success at the employee level versus just organizationally? How do we measure priorities and execution against those priorities? So help us think about like, how do you set those benchmarks at the individual employee level to drive those results?
Yeah, for us, it's a couple things, especially at sort of the consultant level, the folks that are working with our clients day in, day out. There's a couple of easy metrics, some qualitative, some quantitative. From a pure quantitative perspective, utilization, how many billable hours are people working, right? How many hours do they bill? That's an easy thing, on a person by person basis, team basis, firm basis. You could sort of, slice and dice numbers like that. But from if you start thinking qualitatively a little bit, one of the jobs of our consultants is also to make our clients happy and to help them reach their objectives, help them reach their goals, right? Put yourself in their shoes, right? And you're trying to raise your client up. We do net promoter scores and things like that to try to get some qualitative things back. But, that's not all qualitative either, right? And it's like the Patrick Lencioni, fable, where we think about, hey, how many smiles occur at the drive-through every day?
Absolutely.
At Gene and
I was
Joe's.
going to bring that. I love that story.
Gene and Joe's Pizza Shop,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And we tell our consultants, like, you're in charge of utilization, how many hours you bill, and the number of smiles you get. And
for our listeners, that's Patrick Lencioni's 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. So read that fable. It's a quick read. That's what Dan's alluding to here. But it's how do we give everyone a number? Employees, almost every employee out there wants to be successful. And I get so frustrated with leaders that have a very pessimistic view, thinking that every employee wants to slack. That's just absolutely not the case. Almost everyone wants to be successful. The challenge is we don't communicate what success looks like.
Exactly.
And so it's like little kids' sports. If we don't tell them how to score, they're going to run around the field with the ball not scoring. And so we need to tell them how to score. And so that's exactly what Dan's talking about here. And it's so powerful to drive results. And it's takes that level of understanding of your business and of what that individual employee actually does. And I think that that's where, through layers of leadership, that gets muddied. And the top level of the organization doesn't really understand what that individual actually does.
Right.
And so really being able to unpack that and what measures success, and starting with a conversation with that employee and understanding from them, how do they feel they're putting points on the board, right? And getting to that common language and that common goal.
I love that story. Can we maybe elaborate just for the people who haven't, that don't go read the story?
Yeah. So
just
to
give an idea.
The Cliff Notes version of this book, and I'm paraphrasing here. So Patrick Lencioni, I apologize to you personally here if I misguide this, but it's essentially a story of a gentleman that was CEO of a big sporting goods chain, and he ends up selling the company, retiring. He has all the money he needs, moves to a little ski village, and immediately gets bored out of his mind. And so one day he's buying a pizza. He finds this little pizza shop. Everyone there is miserable. And so he ends up buying into the pizza shop, becoming part owner, managing it, and unpacking why is everyone miserable and how do we fix it. And so one of the 3 signs of the miserable job, spoiler alert, is that it is, you can't measure success. We don't know whether or not we came in and we won. And so, but that discipline in a remote environment is so critically important. And so I think that the answer to, can companies be remote and be just as productive as companies that are in person, I think we've all proven the answer is absolutely 100% yes, you can. But we've also proven it takes more discipline as the leader. It takes more focus. It takes more conscious leadership. And that's, I think, what has set Dan apart in his career, is that consciously thinking about, how am I going to lead these people? And that's why I love this piece of the conversation, right? And I think the other area that Dan's done an amazing job with, and where most remote companies really fall down, is on the rewards and recognition piece of that as well. So talk to us a little bit, Dan, about what you do within your organization for rewards and recognition.
Yeah, and maybe as a good preamble to that too, that ties into what we were just talking about. We are pretty open with a lot of our numbers, right? So every week on our all hands pulse meeting, we share the firm's utilization, realization, kind of where we're at, for the prior week. And then we also show a little scoreboard of recognizing like the top 5 or 6, most billable folks from the prior week too, giving them a gold star and calling out their efforts. And we have a lot of people working really hard right now. Right. So there's been a lot of people on that list that are that are kicking butt, and I thank them very much for the hard work they're doing, and they love it. They love helping our clients and are very passionate about it. So yeah, for us, we also love peer-to-peer sort of rewards and recognition. It's one thing, it can't all come from me all the time.
Absolutely.
And honestly, I think our people love to hear it more from their peers than they would me anyways. That's hard for my ego to accept that, right?
But great cultures are self-policing.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're driving through that.
And a part of that weekly pulse, which I just love, and our employees have, our teammates have evolved this process. We list out our 6 core values, and every week people put shout outs in the pulse. Like, they will go into the document ahead of the meeting and type up like someone who has vividly lived out our core value in what way. And then when we get to that part of the meeting, they will talk about it. And I sit back and just smile, right? Because I'm like, this is just the coolest thing ever. And to see people recognize those core values and recognize their teammates. For us, I always like to say, and especially in my career, one of the biggest rewards to me in my career was getting more responsibility, getting to do bigger, more challenging things, solving bigger problems. And for us, that's one of the biggest rewards, I think, that we could give people. So that means we inherently look for people that like to work hard, people that like to challenge themselves, people that want to better themselves every day.
And get more responsibility, not less.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this this example. I'll also give a little shout out to Bonusly. I know we've kind of maybe talked about that in the past, and it's a very similar thing. And it's where you can actually feel and taste like the culture in real time, right? Very similar, like Bonusly, it's we'll say an app that integrates into Slack. So people can, and you get a certain amount of points that you can give out to other people.
Right. So it's a real-time micro rewards.
It
right?
is.
Small rewards constantly generated from across the entire organization, peer-to-peer, supervisor-to-peer, peer-to-supervisor, right? Doesn't matter your position in the organization, you can reward the culture that you're driving.
And your points are always just to give to other people, right? And then you hashtag just exactly like you said, whatever value that is, right?
Yep.
Whether it's raise the bar, accountability, or service, or whatever. Like it's just a really, really cool example of how you can incorporate that in real time.
Agreed.
And people love it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what we heard, right, how to lead a great remote team is clear goals, clear numbers, clear expectations of behaviors, rewarding and recognizing in that real time those behaviors and those contributions to the team. Anything else that...
Can I add one more that I think I heard that I think is really important? And I've spent some time thinking it was the transparency piece.
Oh,
right.
Yes.
I think that's huge. Like, I've read about radical transparency, right? Like, how far do you take that? And I've tried to stay on the forefront of this. It's like, I'm just like, how much of an open book can you be? So I love that there's also the transparency piece in there too, because basically that gets into trust, right?
Right.
And being able to trust your team with numbers and exposure.
Especially in hard times too. I think transparency counts even more with the way the economy has been lately. Lots of layoffs in tech. I'm sure our folks were thinking, what in the world is going on here? You know, are we doing okay? But I think through our transparency, right, like people don't have to wonder that, which I'm definitely proud of.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So as we look to kind of wrap up here, what's your one big thing that you would love to share with our audience? The one big lesson, the one big takeaway that you have as a leader that you wish someone would have told that MBA student graduating out of Pitt that, you once were? What's that one nugget, that one piece of knowledge you wish that someone had shared with you earlier on in your career?
I think you nailed it earlier, Tim, which is leadership is a constant learned ability and a skill to hone. It took me a while to realize that. But I think once I did, the skies clear up, right? And you don't think there's any of these limitations on you that, hey, maybe I wasn't born with this ability. I know for a fact now, right, that leadership is learned. It's taking those experiences that you go through every day, reflecting on them, thinking about the intentions, thinking about how it makes people feel, the cause, the effect, and just being a perpetual student of leadership is incumbent upon CEOs and leaders of companies.
Wonderful. Very well said.
Yeah, I think you are literally a true definition of a leader, and very thankful to have you here. I can say just for me, I learned even today talking about empathy, which is one of my core values, and talking about the golden rule versus the platinum rule. And I think I'm going to take that back and really spend some time thinking about that. So I appreciate that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Successes, but your failures as well. Some of the things that you've struggled with throughout your career, I know that's going to be impactful to our listeners and help them grow in their journey.
Yeah, and I think if you want to get a taste of this thought leadership, follow Dan on LinkedIn. He's got great content on LinkedIn. His newsletter's awesome.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah, honored and sort of humbled, but being here with you guys. You guys are also fantastic leaders. I've learned a lot from both of you in my career so far too, and happy we could share this journey together. I think that's also extremely important, is to surround yourself with other good leaders that you can learn from. And thankful I have YPO and our connection there, Josh, and working with you, Tim, has been phenomenal for myself, but also our team. So really enjoy that, and look forward to the growth ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this very first podcast of You Can't Make This Shit Up. I promise you that we are going to have some truly unbelievable stories in the months ahead for some of our guests that are going to make you laugh, might even cry a little bit, but more importantly, you're going to learn from us and our mistakes and our guest mistakes on how to become a better leader and how to continue to navigate your own personal leadership journey. So thank you so very much. Glad to have you, and can't wait to see you till next time.